Where do I face for the camera? The microphone's here, but the camera's here. My name is Scott Memhard. I'm the Ward 1 City Councilor and Chair of our Budget and Finance Committee, along with Councilor Tony Grow at large.
Gross. That's a Grow.
Jason Grow is over there at large, and Jeff Wordley at large. So a lot of larges, and then Council President Val Gilman from Ward Boondocks.
It's God's country.
Ward 4. And this is, as Val will introduce in a moment too, a committee of the whole city council as well as budget and finance. I'd like to welcome our established eminent panel of experts here. We are all going to be educated tonight, that's for sure. So we have Sherry Carvallis, our clerk of committees, Sherry White. Thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
John Dunn, CFO, Jill Cahill, CAO, Melissa Texera Prince, School Committee, Kathy Clancy, School Committee Chair, Ben Kumas, Superintendent, and Gary Frisch, the school CFO. I'd also like to welcome, while he's here, our esteemed journalist representative who's here in the audience, Ethan Foreman. Fourth estate. Yeah.
Councilman, we also have from the school committee, Bill Melvin on the call.
Excellent. Welcome, Bill.
And I believe it's Pam Toby from the mayor's office.
Well, we are here as part of the city budget review process, and we're taking the mayor's budget and the school committee's budget. And tonight is the school committee's night for us at Budget and Finance.
And I would like to open the committee of the whole, because we now have 5 members of the city council. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy and Ben.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Ben's going to do the presentation. We're glad you're looking at the school budget. I know we're kind of later than most years because I think there was some delay on the city side for reviewing those budgets. So our presentation to you, I think, is a little bit later than usual. So we've been talking about it since November. We had all of our department reviews in January. Numbers have been put together. We've gone through the presentation info many times at our meetings, many recordings, and we've had our public hearing. So we are glad to present to you the opportunities, the goals, and some of the situations that we're trying to make sure get funded in the budget.
Before we dive in, I just want to recognize Councillor Jamie O'Hara, who's also joined us. Thank you.
Hello, city council members and guests. So I'll be going through actually a fairly detailed presentation. You have the full budget, as recommended as recommended and voted to approve by the school committee. But there's some big changes which I'll go through, both on the expense side, but also on the revenue side, which want to go into some detail so folks get a good understanding of it. Some of the important things that changed, both for us, but around the state, and also from this coming from the state house as well. Let me just start my presentation here. I remember from last year, the city council doesn't mind if I speak quickly. I'll do that, but still I'm going to go through some pretty detailed information here. I'm not sure what's driving our budget. So in terms of our main budget drivers, so we always start with our guiding principles, which are aligned with our goals. So there's sort of really 3 primary areas here. One, the budget development and all increases our budget is tied to our 3-year plan for ongoing improvement. So the school committee adopted that based on my recommendation in the fall. And we have 4 major priorities there. Deepen student belonging and engagement. So what we know is that if students don't have a sense of belonging and if they don't feel engaged in school, they won't learn. So that's a high priority for us. Strengthen instruction and better connect general education and special education to make sure that all our instruction is high quality every single day, and that we're also better integrating general education, special education, so all kids get great core instruction every day. As the committee started and schools started before I arrived, and then obviously have strengthened since the pandemic, is make sure our social emotional learning and mental health support is very strong in our schools. We'll talk quite a bit about that tonight. And the last piece, to make sure we strengthen our special education through improved coordination of services and specialized instruction. So if folks ask about goals, our goals are laid out in our 3-year plan for ongoing improvement, and we're making sure that our budget, our school improvement plan, evaluation principles, and others are all connected to that plan. The second principle in terms of that we're building a budget on are the current fiscal realities. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. So we're seeing significant cost in a variety of places, specifically in out-of-district tuition and also transportation services. We'll also talk about 2 different areas there. Some related to budget, some not. I mean, to the pandemic, some not. And then we also want to build a budget based on the current program realities. So the growing number of students with complex needs, and also investing in O'Malley. So that's how we started the budget process, and really we're trying to zero in on these 3 basic principles. But what became pretty clear pretty quickly is that the cost and the funding landscape has changed pretty significantly. So then we have those drivers of our costs and also our revenue. I'm going to describe those in a moment and then go into more detail for the bulk of the presentation. So GPS costs are increasing more than typical due to ongoing post-pandemic disruptions, statewide and regional staffing challenges, and the need to continue investing in strengthening our schools. It's something we always want to do, and that's always the highest priority. But these first 2 are really making an impact on that. And then the last piece is that the fact that our numbers of high need students has increased over the last number of years, and we'll talk about that in some depth as well. So that's the cost side rather. The state funding side, that's changed quite a bit as well. So the state recognizes that these increases in the costs, especially in terms of our high need students, but also other areas too. And thankfully, they're providing the city with the funding to address them. So the Student Opportunity Act, I'll talk about more in a moment, has been changed, has been updated. And that new Chapter 70, revised Chapter 70 funding formula is benefiting Gloucester more than many of those cities and towns. The many cities and towns, those ones that are close, that surround us basically, and others on North Shore and across the state that are getting very little, if any, Chapter 70, additional Chapter 78. Thankfully, Gloucester is getting quite a bit. And then between FY23 and FY24, state funding for the public schools, so state funding coming into the city for public schools that increased dramatically as a result of that Chapter 70 funding formula change. In that we're not quite yet fully benefiting from this funding increase, but this year will make a big step towards that, which we're thankful for. So I want to go into detail on a little bit of those things, especially at this point. First, I'll do 2 different sections here. Increasing costs, I'll go into more detail, and also state funding, go into more detail on that as well. So again, post-pandemic disruption, I'll talk about the significant complex needs of our students, talk about the increase in emotional and behavioral needs related to post-pandemic, and then also inflation and cost spikes are hitting out-of-district tuition, transportation, other costs more. I'll talk more about staffing challenges. So we really are seeing historic staff shortage in a number of areas. Special education, English learners, transportation, food service, paraprofessionals. These are all areas that we pretty much have not been fully staffed or been understaffed all year, and expect that to continue in the future. The challenge, not only for us, but communities across the state, is when we have such a small pool of potential staff members to hire, that's driving up the market rates and competitive and making wages upward pressure on wages. And we're certainly experiencing that, particularly with folks we're negotiating with now. And then we need to provide an increased level of training and professional development for a variety of staff roles, particularly our paraprofessionals, our special education teachers, and others, if you want to continue to strengthen our programs. And the last piece here, that typically always, that's where we want to be investing our dollars, but particularly this year, O'Malley has been challenged in a variety of ways for many years, and prior to recently, the district really hasn't been investing as much as it needed to, especially in O'Malley's curriculum and instruction in areas of school culture and student belonging. So we want to continue that support, which we started really about a year ago, a little bit more. We want to strengthen and expand our Career Voc Tech program. and then continue the curriculum instruction and intervention improvements we've been doing really pre-K through 12. So those are really vital pieces, but they depend largely on how funded we are and the two other challenge areas. So I want to get into some detail here to let you know sort of the impact in terms of some numbers that we're seeing this year that will also impact next year. So we've had a number of move-ins, students who moved in for Department of Children and Families placements this year. So folks move into our city and go and start attending our schools, but they're already in out-of-district placements from wherever they used to live. We pick up the cost for those. We also had additional out-of-district placements this year. So 5 so far during the school year, and we expect more. We still have additional students waiting for placements, but we cannot find them placements quite yet. We expect to find them placements, at least some of them, for the coming year, which of course will increase our out-of-district tuition costs. And then also we've had an increase in homeless and foster students. 5 more students have been placed in our schools who don't live in Gloucester. So they may be foster students or homeless, but their most recent connection to family and schools was here in Gloucester. So we're responsible for providing transportation, no matter where they're placed in the foster system, to come to Gloucester. That could be Lawrence, that could be Danvers, that could be Beverly, that could be even further away. But we're on the hook for that transportation cost. We also are working on limiting our special education costs, especially out of district. And I mentioned one of our goals on our plan for ongoing improvement is improving our special education practices and evaluation assessment and our specialized instruction, using those well and make sure that we're providing the proper instruction and specialized instruction of student needs in-house, as opposed to if we don't have those services or don't have that training, students have to go out of house. So we've been able to keep a number of high need students here in the district because by adjusting our approach, by adjusting either staffing or the instruction that the students getting, that's been helpful. So we're trying to not only deal with the costs, and so we expect move-ins, DCF placements, foster placements to increase, and also adjunct placements to increase next year as well. A couple examples on transportation costs. Adjunct transportation increasing significantly. This year alone, we've had daily rates go from $75 to $200 per day, more than double to, in some cases, triple to $300 to over $400 per day. So if a student is placed out of this district, or if they're a homeless student we are transporting to the district, those rates are significantly higher than they ever have been, double or more. We also have a new transportation lease and a purchase of used buses. We purchased used buses this year. They're actually buses we've been using on our contract for the last few years, in hopes that with owning a few buses, so I believe it's 6 buses, that puts us in better shape for transferring those over to electric buses at some point, if we get involved in the proper grant program or have an opportunity for federal or state funding. So that's the reason we needed to renew our lease this year. We've gone sort of on a double path. That raises the cost to some degree, but puts us in a good position to do some piloting of electric buses in the future, down the road. So, no significant costs on that. And then other inflationary pressures that continue: fuel, food, IT, transportation, our staffing costs. Meal costs are still undetermined at this point, whether or not we'll continue our free meals or not. Either way, we do expect our costs to go up. So moving towards staffing challenges. And these are all challenges, whether it's transportation or out-of-district placements or the difficulty of finding out-of-district placements, that it's not just Gloucester. I want to assure everyone that this is something that if that's social emotional challenges or kids who are having trouble with behavior, that is happening in public schools across the state, across our area, private schools, parochial schools. It's a real impact. All of these are impacts that not only Gloucester is experiencing. So the market and inflationary pressures on wages, and folks, some of these folks we're negotiating now with paraprofessionals, bus drivers and monitors, food service workers. We are lower in these areas. These are some of the lowest paid hourly workers in the whole city. And we want to make sure that we're competitive so we can not only attract, but also retain these folks who are really essential in running our schools. I mean, paraprofessionals support many of our special education students. We don't have bus drivers. Kids don't get to school. And we don't have food service workers, they're not properly fed. So these are really essential pieces, essential personnel But we also see special education teachers in some areas of science and math, where the competition for staff is higher. And therefore, we are often faced with hiring more veteran teachers, which we'd like to do, but they come at a higher salary. Whether that's speech and language, or that's special education, or that's science and math. Really important piece, as I mentioned before, strengthening programs. So we have a bunch of areas that we're working on as detailed in our plan for ongoing improvement. So we are, this year, I've piloted and adopted new English language arts curriculum at O'Malley. We are begun a piloting of a new math curriculum, or we will begin a new pilot in the fall on a math curriculum. We have supported tiered interventions and strengthened use of data teams at O'Malley. We continue our PACE program at O'Malley, which is for students who have spent time out of school for a number of different reasons and are transitioned back into class. So those are kids who are having significant trouble for a variety of reasons. We are going to provide our staff with more training on de-escalation of disruptive behavior next year. That's all learning from this year, and really responding to staff who said that more staff should have that training. We are considering an additional program and our staff to address some of the most challenging student behavior for next year. And as I mentioned before, providing regular, consistent professional development for our special education paraprofessionals. That's part of what's in negotiations right now, but we really do see a real need for how we want to run our schools and support our students, for us to better support our paraprofessionals in that way. In our Career Voc Tech program, we have on a grant funded, we have a director for the first time in as long as anyone can remember. 10 years. And she's dedicated to just Career Voc Tech, just to CVTE, and do a great job strengthening our partnerships, deepening our program, our curriculum, looking at that, but also now looking to expand into medical assisting. So developing a new program that would be medical assisting, which would create another pathway for our students beyond high school, which we're looking forward to. Those are some important pieces we either have underway or want to continue, and this budget allows us to do so. Part of this work is taking positions that have been funded by ESSER and absorbing them onto the operating budgets. We've done this for 2 years now. And this will be our second year, sorry. As you can see, these are interventionists, special education. PACE teacher is for, as I mentioned before, students who are integrating back into O'Malley for a number of reasons, either after short disruption or longer disruption. Adjustment counselor and another special education teacher. For the most part, these are supporting O'Malley, but they all are supporting our high needs learners. They might be academically high needs, social emotional, or special education. And we are I'm recommending the school committee supporting these becoming positions in the operating budget. So what that all means is that if you organize our increases across those areas, that this is a summary of the increase we expect, we're anticipating. They're organized into these 3 categories: post-pandemic disruption, staffing challenges, and strengthening programs. And we'll say that all our salary increases are adopted into the staffing challenges line item. Those are included, are already negotiated contractual obligations in terms of the Teachers Association. So that's our entire increase there. But we try to organize it in these 3 areas for everybody. There's some significant offsets that total about $2 million. So this is a combination of retirement savings, of some limited number of adjustments in staffing that happen because of, could be enrollment. So we have a very small kindergarten class at Plum Cove. And so instead of having 2 teachers at first grade with each 10 or fewer students, we'll have 1 classroom in first grade at Plum Cove. In a couple of different areas, there's a change in programming and schedule at O'Malley. So that allows us to reduce 1 teacher based on retirement there, but no one's losing their own positions. So there's those, and then also at the high school, based on enrollment, what we will always do is make some adjustments year to year on staffing based on enrollment, service needed by students, and that might be up sometimes or down sometimes. Typically it's a combination of, but when we do have some limited reductions based on programming or enrollment or retirements, we're going to take those when we can. we're doing some of that. We're also going to be offsetting some of our health insurance increase over to grants. We are able to allocate health insurance costs for our staff who are on federal grants to those grants. We have not been doing that in the past. We're able to do that this year, and we're going to take the opportunity. So if you combine the cost increases with offsets, you get to an increase in the operating budget of $3.4 million. That is more than perhaps ever before, I think. But the good news is that the Student Opportunity Act allows us to have funding to address most, if not all of that. So I will go into explain a little bit about that and some of the changes we see, which are good for Gloucester. So the Student Opportunity Act was the result of a lot of advocacy, perhaps by some folks in this room over a number of years to adjust the Chapter 70 funding formula. And that was redone in 2019 with a promise of literally over $1 billion of funding coming into localities. And for the most part, that adjustment in the funding formula really impacted or really was an adjustment to to more accurately account for the costs of educating high need students. When we say high need students, we mean students with disabilities, students growing from poverty, special education, and English learners for the most part. And so those communities with larger numbers of high need students or growing numbers of high need students are the ones who benefit from this significant change. And I'll show you now a little bit of why we're benefiting. So our high need students in Gloucester were 48% of our student body in 2015, and now it's 60%. It's a 25% increase from the 2015 levels, which is very significant in any district, including ours. Pandemic impact has led to more students with complex needs, needing more support in school and more out-of-district placements. And that includes our special education students increasing private placements outside of Gloucester. And English learners have doubled since 2015 as well. So, and recently, students with no formal education make up the largest increase of any additional EL students. The largest percentage of that increase is for students with no formal education. So they have not been enrolled, even though they might be in high school or middle school or elementary school, they've not been in a formal education setting before coming into our schools. All those pieces, one thing I failed to mention earlier was out of district tuition. So we have out of district placements for special education in public placements of public schools and also private schools. The state is expecting a 14% increase in the private school tuition for us. So that alone, that private school tuition increase is impacting our budget over $200,000 just for those students who are in private placements. So those are all examples of not only the change in our students, but the costs that are associated with supporting students in the way they need to be supported. So in terms of the Student Opportunity Act and its funding formula, what's determined is our funding formula, our funding for pupil foundation budget has gone up by almost $2,500 just in the past 2 years. So with the new formula, they're saying that we should expect and we should be expending $2,500 more, sort of getting credit for that has cost $2,500 more in new funding formula than it did in the prior one. And we're also benefiting further because our numbers of high need students have gotten to a point where we've sort of flipped over into a higher reimbursement range. So there's thresholds, every 10% or so. And if you cross those thresholds, you're reimbursed at a higher percentage. And just recently, this last year, we crossed over into a new threshold. And that means it's another way of saying that our high need students are increasing in number and also severity. So it's a positive impact in Gloucester. Again, many districts, you'll see Manchester, Marblehead, even Rockport, but for different reasons. And you can really name many, many towns and cities across the state who are making significant budget cuts this year. Many of those places are not getting any benefit from the new Chapter 70, from the Student Opportunity Act. We are, though. Last year, the city of Gloucester received $2.77 million more from the state than it had prior. And I'll show you those in a chart in a second. And this year, about $1.7 million additional in Chapter 70 state aid. So what that means that in FY '22, chapter 70 aid came to the city of Gloucester was about $6.9 million. That was increased to $9.7 million last year. Of course, I'm rounding a little bit here. And then additionally increased to $11.3 million this year. That's an increase of 2.77 million in FY '23, a 40% increase. That's never happened before, probably will never happen again. But even a 17% increase in chapter 70 state aid doesn't happen ever. And that's what we have this year. So all told, depending how you're adding this, there is essentially $4.5 million more in state funding from this year compared to FY '22. That 2.77, as you can see, if you total those all up, meaning if you see this here, we weren't sure last year if that $9.65 million would stay. Would they keep that steady or not? Would the 2.7 increase stick or not? It did stick. Not only did it stick, it added, they added on top of that almost $1.7 million. That's a big help in lots of ways to the city, to our operating budget. But it also is acknowledging the costs that maybe were not factored into the formula prior to this, and also acknowledges the increase in our high-need students as well. So what you see in terms of summary is that for a number of years now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, the schools have stayed with a 2.5 to 3% threshold that is typically expected for many years, including last year, which was a challenging year as well. The city has been a great help in so many ways over the years, but we also stayed within the thresholds. But you see this year, obviously for reasons I've explained, our costs are increasing at a number that, while different for Gloucester, is not out of is consistent with many other communities. We are seeing 5%, 6%, 7% plus increase in other communities. Many of those are looking for overrides, and others they don't have the funds available. The funds haven't come into them from the state like they have come into Gloucester. While acknowledging a good history of fiscal responsibility, we do appreciate and understand that there's an increase this year. This is the budget by department. This is what the school committee approved and then was at our public hearing about a month ago, I think it was. Yep. And then we always give you the latest per pupil numbers for neighboring districts. The latest numbers from the state are FY '21, so I understand it's a couple of years ago. But you can see in terms of, we make comparisons whenever we look at contracts or job position, job postings, or job descriptions or budgets or salaries. We do two comparisons now. We do these districts who are neighboring districts, okay, and then also our dark districts, which I'll explain in a moment. So you see we're sort of in the middle of the pack here, which I think is the appropriate place to be. I said that before, I still believe it. We have some higher wealth districts surrounding us, but at the same time, a variety of different types of districts. And so we think this is reasonable in terms of being in the middle of the road of our surrounding districts, or neighboring districts, I should say. These are our dark districts, so that's every year. Names for every community, the 8 or 9 districts that are similar to you in terms of ability to pay, demographics, size to some degree. And so we're a little bit higher than the average of these districts, or in this set of districts on per pupil. But again, I think Gloucester is better off in terms of ability to pay for a number of these, so this seems appropriate as well, I would say. There is one important piece to, as I think folks are aware, but I'll just be really direct about it. There's a gap in the proposed budget between what the school committee has approved and the mayor has approved. So that gap from what the mayor recommended was $2.75 million. That's the number you're considering tonight. But I will say this, we're working closely with Mr. Dunn and the mayor, Jill Cahill, and the school committee chair and budget BF chair, and Mr. Frisch as well. And believe we have a way to close that gap further, maybe not the whole way, but really have are positive in terms of our work that we'll be able to minimize that. And introduction we have to make, we'll be able to close it, we'll be able to close the gap. So we'll be entering the year with a balanced budget. But just want to know that while we're not there yet, making good headway, and are confident we can bridge that gap. I think that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Where would you like to begin, councilors?
First order of business is survival. That takes some water, right?
Yes. Tony, you've got a lot of experience on this. I defer to you as we in this discussion.
Okay. So you mentioned the bus purchases in here. Actually, the city purchased those, and we just.
So you purchased that, right, and
So
right
that
now,
wouldn't be in your.
well, the plan is for us to pay back one annual payment for the next, I think, 4 years or maybe 5 years to pay off, to sort of return that. So that's how.
So the loan order is being charged against the school.
Yes.
Okay,
So the idea was 4 years at 95,000. Approximately.
So the lease is on our operating budget, then payments, annual payments for that, for the purchase price as well.
we talked about para increase. Where is that? I'm not seeing it.
Yep, so it's in the budget, what we propose, so you have initial proposals for costs for wage increases at this point. I think it's across a few different line items.
I'm looking at the sped budget here itself, and in the different schools, it's actually gone down.
So it's partly in the special education budget.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, so it's
That's what
in
I'm
there.
looking at.
Which has a $2 million increase.
Well, I'm looking at, because it's kind of confusing, because you don't give a percentage, you give future years, but
Yeah, it's,
so I'm gonna go with Beaman. This year, you have sped Harris at 316, 496. And next year you have them at, for FY '24, 270, 835.
yeah, Tony, the increases in the second page. So flip one page over. You'll see there's 500,000 for contingency.
So this is currently under negotiations.
I understand, I know, and I'm trying to dance around that a little bit, but.
I had to confirm the redistricting that we did.
School attendance
So
zones, yeah.
did some come from Beaman and go to Plum Pools? Did we do a switch there with Paris?
Not Paris, but special education staff, one person, yeah, one position, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's under ordinary. So you get the
Yes.
contingency under ordinary, okay.
We can move that with the budget.
That answers it, well, you move that when you still have talks. to deal with.
Yeah.
You don't need that. And is the teacher's contract been settled, or are we in a contract?
Yeah, we're gonna be in the third year, so we'll negotiate next year. So it goes for one more year.
And should I keep going, or is?
Yeah.
Okay. Just the Plum Cove small class, I assume that's just gonna move through, so the staffing is not gonna change.
That's right.
When you talk about the health insurance offset, isn't that just a shifting of that money? That's not any change within the budget, correct? Because we got those grants. And they were either paying for something else, just not necessarily health insurance.
So a couple different pieces.
Unless we
on
had
this.
an increase in the grant itself. It's just the same amount of money. It's not really a savings.
No, but it's right, it's a savings off the operating budget. Yes, that's true. Okay, so reducing the operating budget from that.
But you still get the same amount of grant though that you could charge against either another person or, you got the grant,
Right.
let's say it's a
right,
$375,000 grant.
Yeah.
You still get the 375,000, but now you're using a piece of that 375 to pay for health insurance rather than an extra person at another.
Right, so those grants have a combination of people, supplies, materials, and other things. So
Right.
that's where we would cut the grant is on some of the other pieces within that grant.
Right, but on the revenue side, you're still getting in 375,000 and you're just charging against it differently. It's not like there's no savings in there, correct?
There's
You understand what I'm trying to
I
say?
do, there's savings on the operating budget. We are mean,
I get that yes,
Yeah.
but there were savings on the operating budget in another place before. Because it would be either staff or it would be something that 370, let's just use it as $375,000. It's a $375,000 savings on the operating budget, no matter where it was charged to.
Yeah, Tony, if I can help you out. So one of the areas was food service. So the health benefits is coming from the food service fund. Food service fund had a beginning balance of 400,000. So that's about $100,000 from food service, another 100,000 from the ESSER funds. So the ESSER funds is new, so we're charging some of that against the ESSER fund. So that's 200,000, yeah.
Right, but it's still a revenue source that then you have different, it doesn't matter what items you have charged against it, it's still a revenue source that is a savings in the general fund, no matter where else it came from. No,
So we've moved around money where? Like, you're saying
I'm
we
just
offset.
wondering. You get, an ESSER grant for $350,000.
Yeah.
You've been charging, food service, or you've been charging teachers, sped teachers or something from that grant. Now you're taking some of that and you're moving it into health insurance to pay those grant funded positions. But you've obviously had to reduce the amount of grant funded positions in order to pay for that health insurance. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, but
It had to come from somewhere.
no, right, but we don't have to. So. Couple things, and I'm hoping this is,
And this really isn't, I can ask this question.
but just to be clear, like, we're not reducing, say there are 3 grant funded positions, because a couple of things. So there's the food service revolving fund, there's Title I, there's, and then also.
Some of the.
ESSER.
Yeah.
No, sorry, and then the 240
grant.
special education grant. So that's how we're allocating some of the health insurance increase across those various grants, okay? Let me take one for example, okay? Like the special education 241. Say, I'm making these numbers up, okay? Say there are 5 positions on that grant, okay? We have not been allocating the healthcare costs to that grant, okay? So in order to do that, we're reducing some of the costs within that grant, not related to staffing. Okay, because there's technology, there's materials, there's supplies. So in order to open up the room in that grant, we're reducing other pieces and then putting the healthcare onto it.
And not doing those other.
And not doing those other pieces.
Okay,
Yeah.
that answers the
Okay,
question.
yeah, sorry, I'm just,
That answers the question.
And
Is-
correct me if I'm
was it
wrong.
just, yeah.
yeah, no, we're not just transferring
That-
from grant back to
That
operating. We're actually reducing some
answers
of
the
that.
question, is that then you're eliminating those other pieces that were
Exactly.
eligible for the grant, but you found that there's workarounds.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Other ways, either pay for it, other ways.
All right, yeah,
or not to-
that makes perfect
Okay.
sense. So it's not really, it is a savings. It's not neutral.
Exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, good. All right. Now we
Yeah.
look that through.
Yeah, yep, no, that was a good one.
Good dig there.
Yeah, I mean, we've been, watching the high needs population just, since, well, for a very long time, increase and that's, such a high number here. And if the state budget passes with free lunch for everybody, does that just pay for the food? Or does that pay our personnel costs also?
Just the food and the food staff, the food.
It does, it pays for the serving staff? Oh, okay.
Not the director.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Does it pay for, the food service workers? Does it pay?
Which fund?
So the federal reimbursement.
The state, the state's entertaining,
Yeah,
continuing with
right.
the COVID
Yeah,
free lunch program
Yes.
for everyone?
right,
And does that pay for staff also?
Yes.
Just not the administration,
right.
so not the director.
And the numbers are working out, right? What they're reimbursing per meal versus our costs. We're still keeping an eye on it to, and we look at that revolving account to make sure the
They may not
revenue
break even.
and what the forecast is so that we kind of know what the parameters are of staffing and food costs. And it gets evaluated. It's a
And
couple
I'm sure it's probably just direct service employees, not the driver who delivers meals and not the.
No, it
vehicle.
is the food service staff.
Yeah, but probably just direct meal service. But not, like I said, the driver who delivers meals to different.
Well, the drivers included.
He is out.
Yeah.
And these programs are so important. I mean, participation is up.
Yeah, no, it's huge.
It's huge.
And as you folks may know, that what, again, for second year in a row, the Senate has not included it in their budget.
Oh, they didn't put it in this
No,
budget.
the House has.
Oh,
They did this
okay.
game last year. So if you want it, there's a number of things to advocate for. That's a good one.
Yes, that's a big one because it makes a huge difference. And
Yes.
and I'm glad you made the point on the ELL learners that it's not just English they have to learn. Most of them had their education,
Interrupted.
catastrophically interrupted.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so playing catch up in the state actually wants them to be at their grade level in 1 year. I mean, talk about expectations that are like ridiculously unreal.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll get.
Why don't we we'll pass the baton to Councilor Worthley and then other councilors as well, welcome to chime in.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Lummis. I couldn't do your job, I want your job, and it's really, really hard. Thank you, school committee, for putting this together. All to interrupt me here. I have 4 different viewpoints of the school system, and I don't mean views of the school government, but points that I see it. One, I'm a resident and I'm a taxpayer. And these aren't one initially orders. I'm a son of a paraprofessional, she's now retired. My dad was an education major, but couldn't find work years ago. It turned out my mother was a teacher. I'm a student, formerly a student for Gloucester school systems, different schools, in Gloucester, and involved with site-based management team, hiring principals. I was on a hiring committee for school, the superintendent many years ago. But the main point of reference I have is I'm a father of 2 children in the school systems. It's both at O'Malley. And it's the perspective that I get the most information that's helpful informing me on. They don't come to me and say, will you vote this way or vote on this line, because that's not how our relationship, so it works, but it gives me a good point of view. My daughter, who's in 6th grade, got a letter recently from, giving me the name of the head of the DESE, congratulating her for being the top 1% of the state for the results of MCAS.
Great.
And I'm obviously very proud of both of my children, but that's on an educational scoring side, obviously very proud. My son is equally smart, but he struggles with some of the things that I think all of us take for granted. He benefits greatly from the work of paraprofessionals. He's thriving, and it wouldn't be without the work of paraprofessionals. And but he does not test well. I think that's a perspective that it probably goes throughout the system. Everyone has a different experience on how they absorb information and how they process it. And I think if in the same family with relatively similar DNA and relatively similar home life, to have literally opposite reactions, but same result in terms of the support we provide, I think that's the best perspective that I have to see the work that we're doing. And so there were some things in your presentation, which forgive me for my shock, I guess. When a student comes to the Gloucester schools with no prior formal education, they're held to the same standard in terms of where the state sees it that other students are.
Yes, and. So we're charged with making progress along a few different sort of continuums and these different assessments. One is what they call an access testing, access assessment. And so that helps us, that and then all internal assessments help us determine where the child is on a sort of scale of 1 to 5, basically, 5 being fully fluent and sort of thing, okay? And so we're charged with making progress at an accelerated pace for all the students. No matter what background they have, And so, just like a student, you know, like you said, comes with different learning capacities, learning abilities, strengths, you know. Even if they were born in Gloucester, you know, or born someplace else in the States and came here fully fluent English, we still have to adopt and be flexible with that student. Now, we have work to do in terms of English learners, especially around our curriculum, and specific curriculum for newcomers. And we were this year, Department of Education sort of acknowledged as much. They did a review, called Tier Focus Monitoring, and this is sort of the guidance they gave us is that we need to do better on two areas: sheltered English immersion, which is typically seen for students who are have some English skills, but they're learning in the content areas. So at O'Malley or at GHS, they're taking subject areas. They might be taking biology or physics or math, but they're in a class that's geared and using techniques specifically for English learners. Okay, or so that we needed, the SE said, need to improve that work, improve training in these areas, okay, with our teachers. But then also we improve our curriculum instruction on for newcomers as well. So that's places that we have to continue to invest in because we do have to respond to any whoever shows up at our doorstep, you know, whether that's again born and bred in Gloucester, you know, tests well, or has some needs additional support, or you know, new to the country, doesn't speak English and hasn't had much formal education. So there's a big range there, and you've got to be ready to respond and support each child.
It's hard.
Yeah, no, folks ask a lot in public schools.
Yeah.
You know,
And in an age appropriate way, because I remember
Right.
asking this question, like if someone comes to a school and they're at a first or second grade level, we're not putting them in first or second grade, right? We're putting them in their grade level, their age appropriate, and going from there, subject to MCAS and all the other testing.
And
So it's a struggle.
when someone, English is their second language, are they taking MCAS tests in English?
There's some, it depends exactly when they arrive, but within the first full year of being in school, Gloucester is where you got it.
Which makes sense, right?
It makes sense, but doesn't make
No,
sense. I mean, it makes sense.
I'm
The answer makes
kidding,
sense.
I'm kidding.
The answer makes sense, but
In
it doesn't make
English.
sense.
They're not being tested in math
Right.
in their native
Right.
language. They're being tested in math using instruction.
So this isn't criticism of anything that you're doing. This is wow, right? So imagine you get dropped or brought to another country, you don't speak their language, and then in a year, you're gonna take the test in the native language, and you're just trying to figure out, like, how do I say, where is the bathroom, right? And you have to take an MS test, and those results are then reflected in the results of the school department. It's really not fair to evaluate your total work capacity based on a testing system that creates that scenario.
I mean, I do want us to be, you know, it's our job to really help these kids advance, you know, and they do so much work on their own and, you know, I mean, and when I say they, I mean, any student comes, you know, with English as a second language, they work so hard, you know, and it is our job and our responsibility to support them as best, you know, the best possible support they can get, right? It doesn't mean it's easy, and we can get better at it. And someone that's looking at our curriculum, someone that looking at our instruction, and someone that's looking at, you know, training for our teachers. But I'm okay being held to that standard because those kids with his heart, I mean, I don't like saying those kids, any student who comes, you know, with their family, for good reason, you know, and makes their home in Gloucester, deserves and needs and warrants that support from us.
I
So,
appreciate the respect that you're
yeah.
not walking away from that responsibility
Yeah,
or shirking, so
yeah.
I understand that. I
but
just
you're right.
being
It's not
compassionate
easy.
to say, it's
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, absolutely.
It's really hard, not just for the students, but the teachers, the professionals, and the professionals administering this, so. I want to ask you a couple of questions. You said that in your presentation that there were a number of students who are homeless. Now, and also you mentioned people moving because of foster care
Yep.
and that they could be placed in homes, I think, as long as or Beverly, it doesn't matter how far away they are. But on the homeless, we actually, I asked a question very thoughtfully. We're not bringing them to like, if we're transporting them, going to a home or they're going to a shelter, or they're not going anywhere, it's been dropped off.
No,
How's that
yeah,
work?
no, I mean, different, lots of circumstances. Okay, also depends on the age of the child, age of the students. Right? But there's homelessness is defined in a variety of ways. So couch surfing, you know, so students, and not only we, but you know, many communities, most communities have kids might be couch surfing, okay? So they have a roof over their head, it's not their roof, okay? But they're, I guess, housed in a sense, could be a foster placement, temporary placement. So there are lots of temporary placements, and it could also be another version of homelessness is when families are, you know, living together in a way that's temporary. So temporary housing, yeah, so,
You don't know from one day to the next what that scenario is gonna be like at home. That could change that too.
yeah, for, definitely for families, I mean, that's happening, you know, both ways, you know, folks losing housing, folks gaining housing. It is, you know, coming off the pandemic and some of the safety nets that were there and aren't there anymore. This is making it hard for families who lost their, you know, all of this. So, but that's, you know, again, you know, it's, you know, I've got some good staff who work really closely with families. We've been able to improve our bilingual staff recently. Can always do more than that than we have right now, but you know, are doing a better job of understanding what the situation is, make sure, you know, a limited number of people know the situation in order to support the family. And, you know, providing, I mean, and then, you know, there, any student who may be homeless or underhoused, they, you know, once they're in schools, they're in schools, you know, and so other kids. But I will say that, you know, that's another example of the difficulties our families have, and our kids have, you know. And, gosh, I just give those families and those students tons of credit, because they're having challenges that I've never experienced. And you know,
I appreciate that you put yourself in their shoes. At least that I can.
And if you want to know more about that, if you reach out to like Youthany that's downtown, or the community impact unit, the police department, they put wash machines and dryers in there. You'd be surprised the numbers of the community. I went and met with Youthany and saw the kids coming in and the services they provide, which is the homeless couch surfing population in Gloucester. You think, oh, maybe 3 or 4 kids? No, there's a lot more. And those are the kids that are in the schools.
I think, so I'm very grateful, and I think those parents and the students are grateful, but also, we're very lucky that the schools might be the only constant in their lives. And you said you have good staff, I also, I think you have great staff. And I just feel very strongly about the teachers and paraprofessionals that are doing that. Again, or double down or thoughtful about don't negotiate in public and all that. Your budget does or does not factor in the potential raise for the paraprofessionals.
yeah, so whenever we're facing negotiations, so contract salary increase aren't settled. You know, that happens every time we negotiate basically this time of year. We allow in our budget for expected increases. And then we have to adjust depending on, you know, whether how they eventually settle.
And when,
And when that happens, and sometimes that's, I mean, they're always retroactive, almost always retroactive to the beginning of the fiscal year. But we're always planful in that and have planned appropriately this time as well. And then if, you know, if it's settled for more than we budgeted, then we have to make adjustments within the year, and, you know, always prepare to do that. But hopefully, yeah, but hopefully we'll get it sorted out pretty soon and we'll just, you know, have it solved. Yeah.
I remember back when the school department was renovating West Parish, I think it was the case. And I think there's former Councilor Cox who was a little frustrated with the decision that was compelled, which was to rent senior school. It was, the timing was tough. It was sort of like, we do this or we don't have a place. And I remember her saying that she voted for it because there was no other alternative. But I remember there's frustration, and then now we've been lucky to continue that relationship with the Archdiocese to use Stadium School while the construction being done. But I do hear from, and we did a tour, one of the clerks from Works or one of the representatives from the construction company was sort of dropping the seeds of this may not be ready in time. We've heard that a little bit. Okay, for the start of the school.
More
No,
of that.
I actually did say it. I just didn't, it wasn't official.
Just like we're not moving back to Gloucester when they do the courthouse. That's just community chatter.
Yeah, right, and we want to keep focused on the budget. which is
Right.
good.
Oh, no, but it does, hang on. Yes,
That is a budget issue.
The clerk that did the tour told me that, so it wasn't just Chatter, but I'm aware that Chatter can sometimes take on a life of its own. Does this budget account for potentially East Gloucester still staying open for a period of time, or is it not at all?
No, it doesn't. And just to end any speculation here, the project remains on time, on budget. It's never been off time, off schedule. There have been adjustments in the schedule and probably every week they deal with different, circumstances, like supply chain sort of stuff. We had a potential hiccup. I think it was in April, which was, the level switch gear, which I went to the Gloucester, East Gloucester and veterans and talked to staff there. Had a meeting with the school committee, was very open about that. And then within 2 weeks, we had 3 different scenarios we were pursuing to solve that. And the team resolved in, scenario A. And so within 2 weeks, it was sorted out that we'd have temporary switch gear there. And so anyway, but just to be clear to everyone here, we've never been off schedule and we've never been over budget.
That's not in this budget anyway.
No, there's no
Same-
contingency
same-
for.
There's no cost
That's
in this budget at
And that's why I'm
all.
just raising.
So it's not even in here.
Got it.
That would be on the city side.
Okay.
I think we are doing a great job on terms of, merging those 2 schools and Principal Fusco and Principal Christy Lambert have done a fantastic job in terms of having professional development, having staff meetings, connecting to, it's a combined PTO at this point. But just I can't even go into all the different pieces they've been doing. The hardest part of any merging of any organizations are the people, and they've had a lot of attention on that. And feel very good that there'll be bumps, never easy, but I think we're gonna have a really strong combined school committee there.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we use this opportunity properly. The room mill can kind of catch up now to say that your expectation, everyone's expectations, everyone's going to be going to that school as
It's
planned.
been reported at least a month ago that.
And I'm just using this as an opportunity, anybody who's listening, to make sure.
At no point have we been off schedule. We're on schedule, and I think the moving materials show up tomorrow, next day at each school, so folks can start packing. But we are full steam ahead for.
Excellent.
Our time open.
My last question for now is the difference between mayor's budget and your budget and how we as council, what is before us, what are we voting on? I know that you're making progress with the conversations you're having. That's optimistic, but what is before us? I think this question through you is to John.
What's before you is the mayor's budget.
And so if we were to, we're at the sort of the, I would say the end of our review. We've already done a lot of the departments, and as hard as we look, we don't have any smoking gun to say, well, here's $600,000 from this. Like, we don't have that. And so if we vote on the mayor's budget, then it goes back to the school department to make cuts, I assume.
Well,
Except,
continue, sorry. What's that?
no, I was just saying, we voted at the end of June after the city council voted.
Where you vote on the changes that you have.
Yeah. Well, we vote on the bottom line in June.
We vote on our detailed budget at the end of June.
June.
And so any adjustment
Bottom
that
line.
we need to make either by our side or the mayor's side will be done between now and then. And I think now and perhaps when you guys take a final vote, but again, that's in process, so. But then we take, the school committee takes a final vote after the city council votes. That's at the very end of June. So adjustments can be made.
Would there be value to you? And the answer is no, that's okay. To say, if the budget that's before us right now is passed, here's where we think there'll be cuts and what would the impact be. I'm assuming you have some sort of first place you have to look.
Yeah, I mean,
If the answer is not now, that's
yeah, no,
okay too.
I'll want to say, we're looking at a variety of places, and that really depends, as we continue to work with the mayor and his staff. But if I, was public with those various things, and when they're all hypothetical, I'm really conscious that can create a lot of agita or concern, unnecessarily.
Well,
That's all. Unnecessarily, because it's all, in light pencil. And I wouldn't want to, go down that road and when there do have to be concrete adjustments made, the school committee will know about them. and other folks who are impacted will know about them. But really only when that's the, fact as opposed to just us working through some things.
I was-
So that's okay for them.
That's fine with me. I just wanted to see if there's a clear place. Well, if this doesn't pass, and this has been the case in other years, if this doesn't pass at this level, here's where we're gonna have to cut. And I'd like to,
Yeah, so in the
No.
past, we had the tier approach, right, if we got funded, but past couple of years, we haven't had to act like that on those conditions
Right.
because we've been grateful for the city funding our budget. And even this year, we're not far,
right.
right? There's
I wasn't
a,
trying to create,
there's an
I want
amount
to
there.
make it easier for us to say, okay, this is what you're voting on, this is what you get, right? And we don't know that. Well, we do know that, but we don't know the differences between we don't know the impact of the differences. Maybe it's not for us to know.
I don't think it will be.
at this point now, because we're
Is
not
that fair?
planning that.
If there are any adjustments that we make, or the government from his side, I think they, of course, would bring that to you, right?
They don't, again, they don't get to vote on that. They get to vote on the number.
Right.
So, and then of course, we'll share that with them.
Yeah,
that's okay.
and this is a helpful clarifying conversation and it reflects concerns that we all as councilors.
I always say last question.
Okay.
Ask one more.
Yeah, I'd like to move on. Joe.
There was a chart you showed, and I just wanted to be helpful, I think. There was this year showed a 7.25% increase. I think that's, I'm sorry, I can't find it. Is there a way to differentiate? This is a part I learn as I go all the time, right? When the state says, here's more money, the federal government says, here's more money. And we obviously apply that money where it's supposed to be. It shows us the total budget has gone up. It doesn't differentiate what the lost or taxpayer contribution has done. What's the growth from the prior year that specifically lost? I think the food administration. No, that's the increase in the state, the chapter 70 funding. I think it was on one of your last slides.
It was a percentage each year that we've gone up,
Yes.
and then this year hit 7.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there a way to say, this is what the
Slide
city?
24.
Yeah, this is- oh, is it already?
Yeah, it's like,
You're
I'm
on
sorry.
your history of fiscal responsibility.
So is there a way to say?
yeah, so,
I highlighted, but I couldn't find
a
it.
couple of things, the state funding, the state aid that we talked about, so we talked about the $1.7 million for this year. The way the state funding operates is that goes to the municipality, city or town, in this case, the city, and the city determines how much of that should go to the schools. They're not required to apply all of that to the schools, okay? And so that's really, that varies municipality to municipality. So.
When you say to the schools, of course, through our municipal budget process, there are various
Well,
avenues that
exactly
it
right.
gets to you.
Right, so it may
Within
not
the
go
overall
directly to
city
the operating budget, right, but it could go to capital expenses,
Yeah.
it could go to DPW, which of course is in charge of our buildings.
Yeah.
So there, and so we're not involved in those decisions about how it's apportioned. And that's what I wanted to add, is that it's not up to, it doesn't, it's like described in the Student Opportunity Act, doesn't all come to the school's operating budget, but, and how it's allocated is up to the mayor. Or, the city executive.
So is there a way to say of the 7.25% increase, some of that is state money and federal money that's just by nature of us spending
Our
more?
budget's a cost budget, it's not a revenue budget. Right, so we're building our budget of what our costs are.
Right.
Our revenue comes from the city without the source being identified because it's their big bucket.
So for example, the school lunch, is, I guess we'll call it lunch, it's breakfast too.
School meals, yeah.
School meals. That has been paid for by the state.
Federal and
Federal
state.
side, right,
And it's in an enterprise fund,
right. So we just approved, I think,
revolving.
2 months ago, we approved that number. And it might look like the school department's spending more money when, I guess, from an expense standpoint, you are, but it's not. I'm not being clear on that question. I'm trying to say, how much is that coming from Gloucester taxpayers, specifically real estate tax, and how much is coming from the state of that 7.25% increase? Or if you don't know the answer, that's okay too, but it'd be helpful to kind of
But it can only go up 2.5%, right, each year, proposition 2.5,
the overall tax levy,
tax levy.
not including new growth.
So your question is, how much more the taxpayer is paying into that 7 point? I'm just trying to understand the
Close,
question.
very close. I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate. Of the 7.25%.
Increase in
Increase.
our budget,
How
which
much
is
is that?
special ed out of district transportation.
all
You
of
saw special ed went up 2 million alone, right? So you want to know how much more of a percentage the taxpayer is going to pay of that because the 7.2 is higher than the
Yeah, I'm
previous
not-
years? Just trying to
yes,
understand where
I'm
we're
not asking
I
getting.
think I might have an answer.
Okay,
But I
yeah,
mean,
just
it's-
trying to
it's-
understand the
it's not an
question.
answer, but what, but no, so anything that our, say our budget goes up, by $2.7 million, which is what the mayor, for. We don't know ourselves what portion of that is either, levy, or new growth, or state funding. That's not us to decide, okay? That's, the mayor and his staff determine that across, all the various departments. So that, I just, so it can be any one of those, any combination of those, and those vary year to year, or percentage, but I can't tell you that, we can't tell you.
It might not be an answerable question.
I
but-
might ask you that question and you can answer me, so you'll find out.
Okay.
And my is chapter 90 money specifically for
Yes.
road repair? So chapter 70 is not similar to that,
No, I understand that.
right? Because it comes with the, to be supportive of education, but it goes into the city. And there's no mechanism that says it has to go here, there, or anywhere.
I guess the way I could say it is if there was a funded mandate that's funded from the state and federal government, and say, okay, you need to spend $2 million and here's the money. You would show a number here that was higher, but it actually, in that scenario, cost anything more out of the budget.
From,
But we don't have that.
right, we don't have that, right.
But you had it with the school budgets.
Yeah, well, that's a revolving fund, so that's not, so revolving funds aren't actually on the operating budget, they're, separate because we're paying for those expenses from
And
the
that's not
revenue.
reflected in the 7.
Right, right.
Understood.
And in some ways, another version are various federal grants, okay, because they give us this amount of money, and we are obligated to spend in certain ways. Okay, that can be, that's Title I, that can be ESSER, those sorts of things. So typically, in terms of our funding, whether it's a specific source other than, local revenue, that's when we have a better ability to say, this is the source and these are the next expenses. That's to be grant or revolving.
I forgot the division involved.
Could I offer to turn the table over to the other councilors who would like to engage in questioning?
I would love Mary.
Yeah. We also have Councilor O'Hara.
So, I'm intrigued, thank you, by the way. The school committee as well. So the 3 students that were waiting for placement,
5.
I thought it was 3 are on deck and 5 came in.
5 and 5, that's my understanding. We have 5 kids waiting.
Yeah, that may change.
Okay.
On a different week or this, but that's, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So is it possible that those 3 or 5 will be part of that 14% increase because we're waiting for them to get into a private school because of the nature of their requirement?
It could be either one at this point, but
Okay.
there is potential for a private placement, yeah.
Okay, so
certainly.
that would be a big unexpected jump
Yeah.
to this. So that's one of those unfunded mandates that we can't expect and anticipate and be totally on target.
Right.
So that's always a little, it's risky.
It's risky, and so we have
Okay.
some contingency in there. What happened this year was, let me get the numbers right here, Gary. But our tuition and transportation, during this fiscal year 23, went up nearly $1 million. Okay, and we were able to cut corners to identify the dollars to pay for those increases within the fiscal year. Okay, sometimes, maybe next year, it's possible that we won't be able to find the dollars within our operating budget. And that would be a time we might have to go back to city council and say, this is what, what I talked to you about in this meeting, 6 to 8 months from now happened, which is, they've gone up significantly, or we had enough, number of replacements that are, our obligations to our students are, legal obligations, to provide them with, appropriate education and the leadership environment for them. Need additional dollars. That could be because transportation costs, that we don't, like it didn't happen this year. I hope it doesn't happen, but there is some possibility that it doesn't go as planned
Okay.
and we outstrip our contingencies, which we have, within the budget. because we always expect some growth, okay, so there's a possibility of that.
Okay.
There really is.
And so the 5 students that came in after the beginning of this school year, did they have, I don't know if you can say this or not, but with their language requirements that we needed to get that we hadn't anticipated, or is that, I don't want to get.
Yeah, no,
private
I don't
with
know
whatever
what the
their
specific
issues are.
instances were with those students.
Yeah,
I will say this though, you know, we have increased, we have students who are, you know, need out placement every year.
yeah,
And we also have some students who we bring back. You know, because they've made progress,
okay,
or we're now, you know, they've made progress. They need a different setting now at this point, one we can
Yeah.
provide.
Okay.
So there are also ups and downs that way as well.
okay,
And so that's part of the balancing act,
Okay.
literally, in terms of budget and otherwise,
okay,
that we, you know, just do every year. So, and that's what we're always trying to do. Our first approach is, can we provide the service, support, instruction that a Gloucester student, you know, needs here?
okay,
And sometimes we can't, and sometimes later, you know, as they grow up and also as they, you know, are successful in other places, then
Yeah.
they get a place where maybe we can bring back to our school, so.
okay.
But that happens, you know, in the course of any given year.
And how many languages are we speaking in terms of Gloucester Public Schools?
I'm speaking one.
Yeah.
No, I actually don't know. I remember when I was teaching the grade schools, we actually were watching that closely. I don't know. off the top of
I thought we had a report on that and it was almost in the teens,
my head. We may, and I
Yeah.
don't remember.
surprisingly,
Yeah, but I can
So more than 10.
yes.
probably. Yeah, but we can find it. I mean, by far, in terms of, you know, after English is the first language, Spanish and Portuguese are the highest ones. And really, in terms of Portuguese, most newcomers are Brazilian Portuguese.
Okay,
So,
And that's what I was gonna say, sometimes within the Portuguese language, it's
Right.
3 or 4, right? I'm someone who gets interpreters all the time.
Yeah.
I'll request a Portuguese interpreter and it doesn't work because you needed a certain type of Portuguese, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of dialect, even with Italian in Gloucester, there's 2 different versions of
Yeah.
Italian.
okay, that's helpful. And I think that was my last question. So I am done with my questions.
Counselor Grow?
Yeah, it's some clarification if I could. Do you feel like I'm a little troubled by the passivity of the chapter 70 funding? I realize you don't have any control over that, but the intention of chapter 70 is for education funding. And certainly the intention of the Student Opportunity Act is to increase education funding to deal with issues that are rising in our schools. Do you feel that the mayor's budget adequately supports that mission when you're talking about the allocation of chapter 70 funding? Because you take the chapter 70 funding away, basically it's only $1 million increase to the overall school budget. So are you getting the money, is the money being properly spent towards education in terms of what you guys do to do your job?
yeah, it's hard for me to answer that because as we discussed before, we don't have it. We don't know where the money's coming from in terms of allocation. What I will say is, you know, $3 million or so, you know, we've laid out clearly what we know our expenses are, you know, an increase there, you know, and I think we're gonna, you know, the mayor has gotten us most of the way there in his proposal, and we're still working with him. So, you know, I think, you know, we'll get there, you know. What I don't want to ever do is ask the city for more money than we think we have in terms of expenses, okay? And that's what we haven't done that in the past. We didn't do that last year, you know? So, you know, I laid out, I think, a pretty detailed explanation of our cost of $3.4 million, you know, and that's the dollar amount we have, and, you know, if we don't get all the way there, I'm, you know, acknowledging that it's still a very large increase. You know, it's an increase the city hasn't seen before, and we'll do right by it.
But part and parcel for the increase of the state.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It's not as if the city magnanimously made that increase.
But it also does reflect a change in the challenges that the school committee and our schools are facing in terms of the special education needs and the very, very expensive care. I mean, I'm somewhat, you know, I really join Councilor Worley in saying we're very much in respect of the jobs that you do but what and you know, dealing with school bus costs and transportation and, you know, some aid compensation. But the scope of the special education needs within the community is just flabbergasting. And I'm missing a little bit of your routine day-to-day where educators, there's art and music and language, and this is, you know, these are our children and this is joyful. And I just don't want you all to lose that either, because this is a big commitment by our community for our children. And, you know, in the past, we've heard discussion about, well, we're gonna have to eliminate a Spanish teacher or a German teacher. We're not talking about any of that right here, right now. But we are talking about a significant increase in your budget and, you know.
I got some more questions, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
I beg your pardon.
Sorry.
Counselor.
Yeah.
It was just a natural.
Yes.
If I can have a little piece of that, which I don't remember what it was. Is that we do anticipate the student operating act funding, you know, will continue to increase for, you know, next 3 or 4 years. I mean, that's what they've laid out. So far, they stuck to that plan. So there'll be continued increases at a rate we haven't
I
seen.
just want to make sure that those
Yeah,
increases carry on to the.
Yeah,
schools
and I
that are
think that's
intended
important,
purpose,
it's
which is-
important for us because to keep, for us, to keep track of, for us to work together on, you know, because, you know, if it doesn't, I mean, if we don't then keep on allocating it to the schools, we will fall behind, you know?
Right.
And so I think that's something to keep an eye on. I think, you know, we're getting to a good place, you know, it can get to a good place for this year. But, you know, I have to keep working on it year after year.
Can I turn that question back over to Jill in terms of what was the administration's thinking in deviating from the requested budget that the school department had? You came up with a $650,000 cut. What precipitated your decision-making in terms of reducing that, given the challenges that they're facing? And most of the challenges they're facing are in costs that are uncontrollable by the district. It's not like we have a lot of discretionary room there. So we're talking about having to accept transportation costs and have a school district placements and things like that. The 650,000, I mean, in the scheme of things, why?
Yeah, and I'll let John get into the numbers, but I think the most important thing to remind the council and the committees, school committees very aware of this, is the Chapter 70 funding for purpose of education includes the facilities. We carry that entire piece on the city budget side. So you have to, so 2 new custodians going into the new school, you know, the rent for the admin and preschool building, all of that piece is carried on the city budget. So don't ever lose track of that piece. And it's much less than, or much more than the 650,000 delta. But in particular, John can go into.
You know, there's $17 million worth of expense carried on the city side that is not in the school budget. If this was a regional school district, all of that would be within that budget. It is not. So debt service, which increased by $500,000 this year for school-related facilities, all the things that DPW does, retirement, pension assessment. Again, $17 million that you don't see in this, that's buried within the general fund budget across 20 departments.
Are all those expenses carried in the per pupil spending calculations?
Yes, they are.
They are. So we actually have a higher per pupil spending than is reflected in the chart? No. All those costs are.
Per pupil-
His
per pupil-
number.
per pupil spending is, you
All of
find
those
it, you know, DESI has it, you can go look it up, you can compare. At this point, or for 2022, Gloucester's per pupil spending was 40% higher than required.
And can we talk a little bit about the vocational program and the intention to create a vocational program director, so we actually have a properly accredited. And what that costs, and what is that a potential at risk opportunity?
There's some risk. I hope not to do that at all. You know, so right now the director we have for a year, but this year is on grant funding. So not in the operating budget at this point. So we want to take that on the operating budget. And because the twin goals there are expanding existing programs. And that means, into strengthening curriculum, but also strengthening partnerships, strengthening internships and apprenticeships, and that's all happening actually, And also strengthen enrollment as well into our, to carpentry, electrical, advanced manufacturing and auto. And we're looking really solid for the coming year, and also looking better than we have in the past of retaining students from their first year to second year, or second year to third year. So we're definitely on the path of strengthening that, and Brendan Waslick, who's the new director, is a big piece of that, working with all the instructors there. And also then now working better than we have recently with, community businesses, the building center, and, because solar were there last week for the, the ribbon cutting of the solar panels, right, which are CBT students. So that's strengthening, doing it. And the other piece is expanding to a fifth program. And if we have a fifth program, then we're an authorized Chapter 74 program by the state. In order to be an authorized Chapter 74 program, we need a director. So that's something, as we said before, hasn't been in place for many, many years. And really the driver of that is that we know that, graduating from high school, folks, what we want our kids to understand is there are many paths from there. There's the trades, there's manufacturing, there's work, the work life, there's military, there's armed services, there's four-year college, two-year colleges, and apprenticeships. There's the Biotech Academy, and we're really seeing that not only are our breadth of colleges, our seniors are being recruited to, but also the breadth of opportunities. And so, and CBT is a huge piece of building great pathways for our kids. And
What's
so,
the benefit of being this Chapter 74 program?
it typically allows us to get further funding as well. More, a part of our Perkins grant funding is tied to that, and then also other state or perhaps federal funding as well.
Can I add to that? So having sat on the tech for 9 years with Val there now, right? The per pupil cost is much higher at the tech, it's tech, right? So if we develop this program that is very female friendly and also male friendly, keep students here in our district where we're paying Gloucester per pupil tuition versus 25 to probably it's up to almost 30 now at the tech for a student to go up there. So developing this fifth program keeps students here in the district, which reduces out of district, not out of district, but I mean, it is out of district, but Essex Tech tuition costs too, which is also part of the cost that's on the city side. We talk about costs as a whole too.
We still got to reduce costs though, because we're members of the.
We get a reduced cost, but there's still
Still pretty
there's still, it's still higher than here,
Yeah.
And to be clear, this isn't a program that's going to develop this year. This is for fiscal year 2025. Where I think this year includes 150,000
Yes, right.
to develop the program.
Right.
So this doesn't count the costs of the equipment, the teacher and things like that. This is just, let's look to see what it will cost to bring this great program and great opportunity to our students here in Gloucester. Very important.
I know the mayor's very interested in seeing this happen, which I think is great.
It's long overdue. We did this work years ago.
Yeah, we talked about this.
Yeah,
Long,
when we
long
all got
time.
on 14 years ago. Here we are now, still here, talking about it.
Who says
Yeah.
change is slow? The last question I have has to do with your, with our school choice spending tuition. It's $150,000 down from what last year was, what it looks like. Are we seeing fewer people leave? I mean, that's a good, it's good that we're not sending as much money out, but is it population or are we retaining students? Because I know that Rockport is hemorrhaging, students in terms of their population because of aging out. How are we doing?
We're doing better. I'll have to follow up with the counselors specifically on the numbers. We did give a report to the school committee a couple months ago. I did notice at that point that I believe that our number of elementary school students in Rockport is the lowest been for any number of years, for a number of years. So I don't know if that's, I'm assuming that that's because fewer are going over there, whether it's, percentage based, I haven't done that analysis yet, but we are, as I've said again and again, our goal is to make sure that every student who lives in Gloucester goes to school in Gloucester. And Rockport may not want to hear that, but I'm determined to do that.
I support that determination 100%. And I also, what's that?
We'd like kids in Rockport to want to come.
They should want to come here. It's great.
Yeah,
My
that's
students
not
love
on this budget, but we
I know.
all hope that maybe some
Lots
opportunity
of
going
kids come
forward.
back.
Yeah, I mean, we have had a number, you know, one of the things that's attracting kids to our schools are our robotics engineering programs at the high school.
Mhm.
You know, and as our arts and performing arts continue to grow in strength, I imagine that's going to be a draw as well. So, you know, we have a really incredible diversity in terms of programming and programs and opportunities at the high school. And that means curriculum, but also means, you know, clubs and other opportunities. And it's quite a great place to go to school. I think more and more folks are hearing about it.
Last thing I'd say is I really encourage you, the administration and the schools to find that, close that gap, and set that delta down, because I'm sure that there are ways we could figure out to find money somewhere here and there that it's not being looked at, but I'd like to see that.
Can I have another chance after Council O'Hara? has a
Yes, I was
chance?
just going to ask Councilor O'Hara. Jamie? would
Thank
like
you.
to-
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Loomis and everyone else in attendance. If you could explain as as far as from the educational standpoint, at the high school, advanced placement, where are we at with that? From what I understand, the curriculum is declining.
I don't know what you mean by declining. Can you explain what that, so I don't understand the question you made.
Reducing the number of courses.
The offerings.
I can follow up on that. Not knowing that question ahead of time, I haven't looked into that specifically, but I don't believe so, but I can certainly find out if we're reducing any of the advanced placement options, and if we are, for what reason. I'll have to get back to yourself and the city council on that.
Sure, thank you. As far as children, graduates of Gloucester High School, right now is approximately 41% continue their education beyond high school. Is there any goals on your part, Mr. Loomis, to try to increase that?
Yeah, so I think when you say 41% continuing education at four-year colleges, I believe that's what that number is. So I don't think there's any magic number on what percentage go to four-year colleges. What we're very determined on doing is one of our highest priorities in our plan for ongoing improvement is make sure that every high school student completes Gloucester High, knows exactly what the next step is. So and I've said earlier tonight, and really value the wide range of options. So that could be a four-year college, that could be a two-year college or a community college, that could be the armed forces, that could be the trades, that could be employment, that could be the biotech academy or the working world. But and the reason that I really value, I think we value that range is because, as we all know in this room and beyond, our young people can create really valuable contributing lives in their community from any of those paths. I mean, we all know people ourselves or others who've been on any of those paths, and they are doing well and contributing to their families and their community every day. So, but what we do want to do is make sure from the time they're in 8th grade, at the very latest, they're hearing from our high school folks that part of your work while you're at Gloucester High is figuring out and making a plan for that next step. We know it doesn't go well when kids don't have a next step, and they're not prepared for that. Because that's where, idle minds and that sort of thing. But so that's what, and that's going to take not only when we talk about transitioning into the high school in 9th grade, that's our guidance counselors, that's our adjustment counselors, that's our teachers talking about it as part of their work at Gloucester High, is figuring out what the next step is, and then making sure they've explored things or have that option or know what it is to be successful in the next step. Whether that's the working world, so we talked about the soft skill of CBT. Part of that is being on time, being regular attendance at work. Part of that is developing your resume. Part of that is developing electronic portfolio now. So that's just one small example. And what other folks know is that sort of well-worn path, what you do to get ready for a four-year college, but there are other ones as well. And so I hope that answered your question, Mr. O'Hara, but we're very, very determined to make sure that every single graduate has not only a plan for the next step after high school, after they walk across that stage, but also are well prepared for it.
Yeah. On attendance, you mentioned attendance. What are you doing, Mr. Loomis? Attendance is a problem. Trying to get students into school, show up for school. What are you doing to get their children into the schools, showing up every day.
Yep.
I know back when I was a student, which was a long time ago, I graduated in 1980 from Gloucester High School. We had a truant officer. What do you do today in 2023 to get these students to show up for class each and every day?
And Jamie, we do want to keep focused on the budget issues, but.
Yeah, so there's some
Well,
budget.
I'd like to just brush on that. I've asked Counselor
Really?
Gilman, I've asked for years that we have a joint meeting with the school committee. Because obviously we represent the taxpayers of the city of Gloucester, and the performance of the students is extremely important. As Mr. Loomis has said, when they crossed Newell Stadium, which I was sitting there, and I've got to tell you, last year, I cry inside, because just knowing that unfortunately a lot of these students are gonna be hit with brass knuckles when they go out in the real world.
Jamie, there's an
Oh,
attendance officer. There's an attendance officer in this
No,
budget.
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, for your budget.
Okay, Mr. Loomis, what, you mentioned the director. Obviously, the management people are great, and you need management people. But, the students are taught by the teachers, as Councilor Worthley had mentioned, the paraprofessionals, which are extremely important. What do you do as far as management? Have you increased the number of managers, non-teachers under your reign as superintendent?
Yeah, I don't like to call it a reign, honestly.
You're the boss.
No, I
So
I
you're
understand
it.
that very clearly. Let me get to your question about administrators in a moment and our educational leaders. I do want to touch on attendance, because there's quite a bit of we're doing, and also some good results this year. The pandemic certainly threw schools for a loop in terms of attendance, and that's not only Gloucester, it's across the state. And just as recently as, I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, we saw a report about how chronic absenteeism is at better than last year, but still at all-time high rates. So here in Gloucester, not only did the school committee completely revamp our attendance policy last year and spent many meetings on that, but the result of that is that we have a couple of things. One, we have attendance teams at all of our at all our schools now. That's pre-K through 12. Okay, those are staff and administrators. They're looking at data every month in terms of who's chronically absent and what individual students. And they're now actively reaching out to those families ahead of time in a proactive way, not just a punitive way, to understand why those kids aren't coming to school. And there are a wide range of reasons. And it's up to us to understand why those students why those families are having trouble getting their kids to school, and support them in doing that. And that might be phone calls, that might be just them understanding that if it's raining, school's still open, all but a whole variety of reasons. That may be getting additional support, through one of our local social service agencies. So that sort of thing. So we're taking a very active approach, and the result of that is that across all of our schools, chronic absenteeism was down 10% this year, improved by 10% this year, so better attendance, but that still is varying in lots of places. So the improvement at Gloucester High wasn't as significant in terms of percentage basis as, say, some of our elementary schools or at O'Malley, which brings me to the next piece. Attendance is largely about what's pulling kids into school, especially as you get to middle school and high school, and particularly high school. And so that's why, whether it's a stronger CBT program, or more clubs, or more extracurriculars, or making sure that the instruction is relevant and engaging to students, or that students know they have someone who cares about them at that school, okay? Could be a teacher, could be an adjustment counselor, could be a dean or a principal, okay? Those are things that gets kids into school. That they want to be there, there's a reason for them to be there, and they see some value in doing that. And so it's much more than just a carrot. We do have an attendance officer, Mr. Gross is correct about that. But that person is sort of dealing with the most difficult cases. We have a lot of work to do on getting, pulling our kids and make sure they've got a reason to come into school. That's especially more important than ever after pandemic, where kids saw more and more that they have options. So that's about attendance, and there obviously is those attendance teams, have some stipends in there. We pay them for their work, but also attendance officers in the budget as well. But we're definitely doing a lot of work on attendance. A big concern of ours. The kids, as we like to say, every day matters and everybody belongs in the Gloucester Public Schools, but that means every school day matters, and we have to do our work to get them in. You mentioned about educational leaders, so there have been some shifts. So in terms of CBT is one example. We added a director on a grant this year. I'm recommending and requesting that we have that director go on the operating budget in FY24. We ask a lot of our teachers, and if we're asking them, we ask so much of them, and we can't also ask them to coordinate and develop the programs, the partnerships, and also seek the additional funding it takes to run something like the CBT and grow it. That requires an administrator who does not have a teaching load to do those things. And the result of that this year is more grants coming into CBT. We're redoing a number of things, including the pneumatic air system, which runs our machinery there. That's a grant we pursued and successfully, and we would not have been able to without Brenda there. So those people, and that's example. Another example would be Amy Cam. She was elevated from a adjustment counselor to oversee our clinical staff across all schools. And because of that, those folks are getting better training, better consultation, and therefore able to support our kids who have higher needs than ever had before. They tell you that. Also, Amy Cam is brilliant at pursuing grants. And pursuing grants for funding of things we already want to do or already are doing. Not growing our programs, but so professional development areas that we want to do. One example, and also supporting families better. And one example of that is the Lynn Lyons came to present to our parents in December about anxiety in kids and anxiety in parenting. And so where we have been very particular in adding staff, another area we've added staff was we've had 2 bilingual family liaisons. And those folks have done a fantastic job in not only keeping kids in school, especially at the high school level, but also connecting with their families to make sure they're getting good support on whether it's enrollment or registration or attendance or knowing what's happening in school. And so I would say we have added a few positions here that are non-teaching positions, but they are real leadership positions. And they are ones that are supporting. Our approach is that those administrators are supporting our staff, not directing them. And I think that's, though I'm willing to show in many ways how those few additions have really added benefit to staff and families in many ways.
Thank you. Jamie, are you all set? Anything else?
Oh, I have plenty of questions, Councilor Memhard. As far as the back to the management, you have coaches within the school system to coach teachers. Is that
We
correct?
call them instructional coaches. So we have, math and literacy at the elementary schools. And those folks, one of the many things they do very specific things. One, they're supporting students and teachers identify which students need additional support or additional acceleration. And they're often providing that small group support to students. Another thing they're very involved in is our revamping and new adoption of our English language arts curriculum at the elementary schools. And that includes supporting teachers and professional development and other means to make sure that they're taking on and learning that curriculum very well. It's a challenging curriculum in lots of ways to teach, but they're doing a great job supporting their colleagues in taking that on.
Mhm, mhm. Do you, and then this is more management skill on obviously you versus past superintendents. Do you get out and meet with the teachers at all, talk to the teachers?
Yeah, so I think you find out if you ask folks that folks see me in the schools pretty regularly. I don't know everyone's name yet, but and I may never know that because I'm not good with names. But yeah, I'm in classes, so I'm seeing principals every month across all the schools. And whenever I visit them, I'm going to classrooms. But you'll also see me at events. Everything from running across lobster crates very poorly to going to staff bocce ball tournament. But definitely in classes quite a bit and have, I think, a good handle on our curriculum instruction and where we are really strong, and then also where we continue to improve.
Sure.
And I would say
No,
that-
I've got the, my constituents, as you know, I'm not saying anything in this room or out to people who are listening, but the economy is not good, and a 7.25% increase. People are crying. The residents who live in Gloucester can't afford to live in Gloucester any longer. They're struggling. Obviously, they're moving out. if they can figure out a way to get out. We've got people moving in that are, by the sounds of it, some of them become additional learning issues for the schools in the city. But we have to find a way to make cuts. People just can't continue to, they're bleeding. It's terrible. I hear it. I talk to people 7 days a week, and
Jamie, we'd like to move on with
7.25%.
specific- we'd like to move on with specific targeted questions. If you could finish your question, I'd like to make another round around the counselors here.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So with that said, Mr. Loomis, is there potentially any place within your budget to make reductions? Nothing is for free, obviously, whether it's state, federal, or city tax dollars. Everything costs everybody money, taxpayers money. So again, is to when we're not in good times.
So we've made some reductions, limited reductions based on enrollment in some places and also program choices and scheduling. So we're always going to make some adjustments, with positions. At the same time, as you described, there's a lot of need out there on many, many levels. And we're seeing that not only in Gloucester, but across the Commonwealth. And, I appreciate your, real close knowledge and relationship with your constituents. And we see every day in the schools just the needs families have. So often these days, the schools are serving as the go-to person for social, emotional, and psychological support. And then we work with our city partners, health department, Action, Pathways, Children, Friends and Families, and others, to support our families and be the one that helps them get additional services. So, we're really well aware of how much needs out there. And so, especially with the historic level of funding coming to the city with the Student Opportunity Act, I think it would, at this point, really be detrimental to pull back and reduce services to our families through the schools. And so we don't aim to do that. Of course, we'll work with the mayor, as I said before, if we have to make some adjustments, we can, and we'll try to limit the impact on families and students. But I do worry in a time when there is so much need and there's a lot of state funding coming to us, Gloucester specifically, to pull back would be a big mistake.
Councilor Gross, you have any follow-up questions?
So we have had constituent questions on, because this budgetary impact on enrollment, where you said that you eliminated one teacher position because of lower enrollment in one of the elementary schools. I'm looking at a budget book here, but I picked this up today, so I don't have any inside information that nobody else had. So just want to make sure everybody knew that. But since, 2014 was a different decade and a different era that keeps getting reflected on. But we have, since 2021, we've increased by 85 students. And that doesn't include our out-of-district students that I can tell, because on another page, we have another 305 out-of-district students added to that, which then brings us over the 2014 number. And I was just wondering, do these numbers that get forwarded back through DESI, do they include the out-of-district or no?
When you say out-of-district, you mean our students are placed in special education placements? Or you mean?
Right, special out-of-district special placements that are Gloucester pupils that are enrolled through us into those schools. So they are some of our highest costs, but they're still Gloucester students. So I think that number, because of a variety of reasons, one of which is need, another which is a change of laws, mandates and things, I believe that number has exponentially increased since 2014. So our enrollment numbers, if you take them and look at them with everything included, are probably very similar to 10 years ago. I just want to make sure people understood that our numbers have been flat, despite the fact that people are insisting that we've been, going down. They're actually increasing. the last 2 years, they've increased by 85 students just on the regular
Well, and that's
education.
a little portion of the increase in chapter 78 as well. So a lot of
Right.
districts lost students who maybe went to private
So-
schools or homeschooled, and when the pandemic was done, they didn't necessarily go back to their schools.
As we have
Most of our
increased-
kids came back.
We have increased by 4 classrooms in 2 years. 4 classrooms.
But that's K-12, so it's.
It's K to 12,
Yeah,
but
so
it's still,
yeah.
it's still.
Right, right, but no, but I think that's right, I think the
And
notion
so I
that.
just want people to understand that. Also, as far as graduation rates. Graduation rates due to the increase of it was on the national news today, this morning, are declining because people are finding students are self-directing themselves into the trades, which is where we are making advancements to. We are spending our money very wisely in these directions. And we are also, the students that also go into the military, they're learning, the skills to become responsible citizens and adults. And when they graduate from high school, these are the unseen, non-MCAS score or graduation, rate signs. And nationally, those are coming down because people are wising up that I can do better by not necessarily going to a 4-year school, but going to a 2-year school right out of high school and then moving on. And that enrollment has also probably been up. So when you look at 4-year schools, there's a couple of different things. We're a working class city, so that the kids are seeing the value in that and also the value in saving money and not burdening their parents or themselves with these high costs of 4-year educational schools. So I think that that's a total, not a good reflection upon Gloucester Public Schools to use that thing. I also want to just state that with the mayor's budget, it's also a 5.85 increase to the school's budget. So I just want to make sure everybody realizes that is, your delta has really shrunk considerably from when I was sitting on that side of the table. And we were
We miss
looking.
you.
So I just want to make sure people know that there
Is it
was.
your fault?
Full responsibility.
Okay, no,
And Tony, to that point with the student loans, right? So we're hearing a lot about student loans
Oh, my God.
in the news, right? Because people like me have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of student loans. So now the conversation is, how do we be fiscally responsible? We actually had a former school committee member that got up and spoke before the high school and specifically talked about that issue. Do you really need to invest, or not invest, but take out those loans at a higher interest rate? Mine were at 7%. To go to school when that might not be the right place for you right after high school. So I feel like this 41% that's out there, oh, we only have 41 that go to 4-year college. Well, that means a lot of people are thinking financially, do I want to take a year off? Is that what I really want to commit to? Do I even know what I want to do? It's okay that that number's not high anymore. We used to look at that number as a reflection on how we're doing as a district. We can't do that anymore. Just like we can't look at our test scores and say, oh, our scores are down, so we're doing lousy. No, we're taking in students that have disabilities, language barriers, and that all creates into a lower test scores because we are now teaching at a different level and teaching to more variance in the needs of the student. So what the old school was, look at the college rates, look at the test scores, look at attendance. We've evolved since 2014, when most of us came to this municipal position in such a way that we can't think like we did in 2014. We have to see what's going on in the district with our kids and what the needs are. And that's what this budget is reflecting. Here we are talking about out of district costs for transportation doubling. We don't have any control over that, but that's the reality of the world. And our increase in those needs is doubling, not doubling, but.
And just one last follow-up
It's a
on
lot.
that. When we do our reports from benchmarks and things from the teachers and they come all excited, they're excited because they're looking at the growth numbers of kids. We're not looking, yes, absolute numbers are one measure, but the real measure is how are our kids progressing from September through June? And are they progressing at the right rate or at at least one grade level? Or if their work came in low, are they making up time? I mean, those are the indications of the real work that our curriculum has helped in professional development. And those are the successes that our teachers are celebrating with their kids is, those are kids really learning if you can see that they are growing.
Wonderful point, perspective.
And that's
Also,
happening.
If I may relate it to, related to a budget and where people try to draw a line between, performance and, there's also zero control over your raw materials that are coming in. It's a very unique situation. You have no control over how well those children come to school every day prepared to learn. Other than, the work you've done with parents, but particularly pre-K and kindergarten, you don't have any control over what goes in there. And it's a very unique situation. People try to say, you need to run it. It's like, but you couldn't possibly run a business that had no quality control over their raw product.
The raw material that they.
Well, can I just add to that, Tony? If we spent the money that private schools spend on their students that they pick and choose, with the quality that we turn out on budgets that we have, what an amazing opportunity that would be for our kids.
Yeah.
It's a stunning dichotomy there.
Can we just go around again?
Yeah.
Councilor Worthley.
Yes, thanks. Some questions and some comments, but I'll try to be brief. Thank you again for your advocacy for this. When I was in 5th grade, it was a long time ago, I had Norman Monroe as the teacher, I don't know if anybody here remembers her, God rest her soul. And she did this little prize, we had students correcting other students' quizzes. And she said, put a check mark when it's right and an X mark when it's wrong. And the lesson wasn't the check, whether the answers, we weren't doing correcting papers for her. The point was afterwards, she showed the papers back and she said, notice that the ones that had something wrong, the X's were really big and the check marks were really small, because the focus, she said lots of times, is the human nature to focus on the mistake, the problem, right? And I think any large organization is gonna have challenges and things to improve on. The lesson though is there's a lot of good news, right? And I think that, I remember my test, there's a 50-question quiz. I got one wrong, but that you saw the big X and I felt disappointed that, someone was accentuating that problem, but 49 right. And I tried to teach it to my son this week. He played taps at Memorial Day at high school. It's 24 notes in the song and he made a mistake on one. And he came back really disappointed in his mistake. And I said, well, what are the 23 right ones? And so what can we do as counselors? It's a budget question. It's also we're in a position of influence to better celebrate the success stories, because there's so many of them every day. And I know you do the best you can to get the word out on that, but we have an opportunity to say, celebrate the success. Is there something we can do as individuals? I ask this of every department, but in a different way. What can we do to better celebrate the success? Because there's many.
So first of all, sign up for our Facebook group, the school district and the school committee one, and share that with everyone you know. And if you don't, if you're not on Facebook, that's the only reason you get on Facebook, okay?
And keep it that way.
That's all you gotta do, okay? And I say that tongue in cheek, kind of, but not really, because we're doing a much better job on sort of broadcasting the successes.
That wasn't a criticism, by the way, that
Oh,
you're
no,
not
no,
wrong.
no,
Just give
no,
up.
no, I know, I know you, I'm trying to be very give you a very concrete answer for a concrete question. So please keep on sharing all the good news that you hear about, that you see on Facebook, that when you go to performance or you see, you hear from a teacher, that sort of stuff. You need more communicators, okay? And then the other piece is, and part of that is sort of beating back the old stories, I'm in a different place than it was when anybody in this room went there, and it's a better place. Still have a lot of work to do, and I'm the first one to say that, but it's a different place, a place that had kids are involved, engaged, they made all the decisions on the rules for the dance this year and had much better attendance and much better behavior because they set the rules, they're involved in making decisions at the school level, which is great. We want them to be more fully engaged and have a voice there. And then also the great curriculum we're doing at the, there's so many good things, at great curriculum at the elementary school in terms of English language arts, and our teachers and how they personalize for every student at the elementary schools, right? And then the vast array of programs at the high school, but go see these things, go tell people, go take pictures, post them on social media, but tell those stories, because they're great stories coming out of school every single day. Support this budget, okay, and our work together with the mayor and his office to get a budget in times that are very difficult, but, when other communities are cutting around us, all around us, okay, and can't get overrides and need to cut staff, Washington's not gonna do that. Washington's gonna make sure that our kids have really high quality curriculum, high quality instruction, we're supporting paraprofessionals, we're supporting students' mental health and social emotional learning. We're doing more for folks than most folks around here. And so tell that story too. So anyway, yeah, and one last thing is, and we have a ways to go. Okay, it isn't our, on a variety of measures, including sort of the most notable ones that people look at, MCAS and others, or chronic absenteeism, or non-grade failure rate, those are places we've got to improve, and tell people that we're focused on that improvement and we're going to make every step, we're going to make steps every single year for years to come.
Councilor Gilman?
So my question, I'm gonna stick with the format, so it's just exhausting. I appreciate
It's all right.
your great answers. So on item slide number 6.
Yep.
You talk about continuing strengthening of mailing curriculum, instruction, student belonging.
Yeah.
Can you just highlight a little bit of how the budget is going to help you stay on that path for this particular need
Sure.
at O'Malley? And O'Malley is very in my head because my son was there only about 8 or 9 years ago. So, and I know the curriculum only, yeah.
So a few different things. So for a minute, I could go on and on, but one thing is, for the first time in as long as anyone can remember, we're doing curriculum reviews at the middle school. So I mentioned completing one with English language arts this year, and now I've adopted a new curriculum that we started implementing this year. And I'll do the same thing with math, and then continue on. Okay. So that means that teachers are working more closely together to coordinate what's being taught and learned and how it's being assessed year to year. So it will grow. Okay, and also that means that grow deeper. So an example of that is our civics projects are being presented on June 2nd, but now we're coordinating those what's the process for assessment and what's what the criteria is. We're teaching that to kids in 7th grade this year, and also start with 6th grade next year. So there's a progression, and that means that kids learn more and learn more deeply over the course of the year. That's improving it. The curriculum or improving teachers collaborating together on that. Another area is because I mentioned program changes at O'Malley, we'll be introducing a social emotional learning curriculum, next year course that all students next year will take, but then from then on, all 6th graders will take. And that's about how do you work together, folks, how do you collaborate, communicate, problem solve, which happen to be things that the high school is focusing on as well. So we build from O'Malley to high school. Okay? We are very much, as I mentioned, one example about the making the rules at the dances. The choice that was put to students and the student leaders was we changed, we get these going better or we don't have them at all. And they wanted to have them, so they decided no phones at dances, and they were open to parent chaperones as well as staff chaperones. And they also instituted a few different things in terms of activities at the dances as well. So getting our students implementing more involved in decision-making and leadership there. Another example of that is 6th grade this year, we started community meetings for each house. And over the course of the year, those were taken on, the leadership of those and running of those were taken on by the students. Well, the 7th grade will do that next year, and the 8th grade the following year. So it's another way of developing the sense of belonging, sense of ownership at school. So, and those things take, for example, we're able to do those community meetings because we added a 3rd assistant principal, okay, in the budget. So that was on ESSER and wanted to take it on to the operating budget, not this year, the next year. That change in programming, we added some staff from last year. And so that social emotional learning classes, basically able to do that because of that change. But then there are also supports for the most students most in need. So you see our interventionists for academic intervention, and then also with special education as well.
Great.
So we're adding on, we're adjusting and investing in a variety of ways at O'Malley, and that's really to focus on academic learning, engagement and belonging in school, school culture, and then also, support of students' social emotional health.
Great.
Yeah, so that's a lot, but we're doing a
Just
lot.
may I have 30 seconds
And
to
there's-
say something positive?
Oh.
'Cause
Now, there's an
I'm-
active PTO also at O'Malley.
Oh, yeah,
Awesome.
right.
So I
There's
just want to
also that.
say, I love when I see things like 4 of our students that just were in college coming back and going to the high school and telling them about their story in mechanical
Right,
engineering.
yeah,
You know,
exactly right.
I go and I share everything that comes out about the athletes, about the music program. And it's like, that's how we can really champion in our schools, because everyone out there knows someone that is in one of those pictures and they get excited.
Absolutely.
And it's
absolutely.
just infectious. So I'm excited, and I think you know that the rest of us in the city council will support you in any way. So thank you, Superintendent and school committee, and Gary.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much, appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'll
Counselor,
say anybody who's.
Counselor Grow, you have any follow-up
do,
questions?
I
Or
do.
you just want to say thank you?
No, I know that was a
Or
hand.
celebrate?
I was just gonna wait, come on.
But
I'm
I-
following the rules.
I am gonna say that I think anybody who's down on our schools, frankly, isn't really paying attention. There's so much good stuff that's going on there. But I do want to get back to the issue of food insecurity. And I guess I should know this, given my home life.
think.
But, yeah, right? But so I hope she's
Hi,
not
Sarah.
watching right now, yeah.
She's not, you're good.
So we're looking at this, the state has not, the federal government is not committing to, has decided not to commit to providing free and reduced food
Yeah.
opportunity
That was,
for everybody.
that was for this current year.
That's for the current
Yeah,
year.
the state
But the
set that.
state said they were going to do it for FY '23.
Right.
And they have not decided FY '24.
Right.
Is the budget funded to provide student lunches and free reduced lunch, or are you in a position to provide it for everybody as it has been done? If the state doesn't step up, and if the state doesn't step up and it's not funded enough, is the administration willing to commit to stepping up to making sure that kids don't go to school hungry? Because we all know that they're gonna learn, they're gonna perform, they're gonna show up, they're gonna be better students if they're not worried about whether or not they're hungry. So where are we with that, given the population of students that we have?
So part of that work is about what's called the community eligibility provision, okay, CEP for short, and whether or not the state's going to participate in that. We expect that they will. We're asking for those numbers already, and then that is gives us the ability to support at a higher level for more free lunches. Probably can't do it across the board, okay. But there is there's a possibility for that as well, so it doesn't come through. And we're hoping that it does, but then in terms of that funding, then if they don't, then we're back to the old days of, some reimbursement, how many kids are qualify, and then making a balance between paid meals and then a la carte. And part of that is increasing participation. It's always tied to participation. Okay. And a big piece there are menu options. And we have a new service director coming on in July, because our Mary Marcia Fleming is retiring after a number of years. She's been fantastic on so many levels. She's a real big loss. But I think we got someone who's quite good coming in, Wendy Ng, and she's all about menus and participation and making sure we're making food that kids want to eat. So there'll be a real challenge if on a variety of levels, if the state doesn't support free meals for everyone, both on making sure kids get nutritious meals, but also on dollars and cents as well. So I want to say we got it covered, because I don't think we do yet, but there's a path. So
Yeah, I mean, that's hard for us to answer without knowing what the number is, right? So, but I think it's fair to say that the mayor understands that the need for free food security and its connection to education. So when they get more information, we'll work through it.
I believe it was
Nice to
late
meet you.
last year. Was it late? We got a late
Um,
decision last year.
Just on Jason's question, do we have a number of what our free and reduced population is? No, because we haven't had
We
that,
haven't had it,
now.
yeah.
we haven't had to
We're
do
not
it.
allowed to use
We,
that
we
word.
do, but they've been direct certified. So if families participate in specific,
Right.
programs, SNAP, that sort of thing.
Right,
So if we come off of that, there is we're doing CEP, then we're gonna have to certify as well.
well, haven't we always had both the options?
Right, but we haven't had to certify recently.
Right,
So, but the challenge on that is, and this is actually a really big deal, is that, remember I mentioned the thresholds we're at, and being at a higher threshold for reimbursement through the, chapter 70 funding formula. If we can certify the level that we have right now, we may fall below that for coming years, so not be reimbursed at its high for people.
Certification now, isn't it district wide as opposed to individual schools?
We typically try to do it from a district level, but we have to go at it from a variety of angles in terms of, contacting folks and making sure they follow through. So it's if we're doing direct certification is easier, but if we're certifying family by family, it's a much bigger variable.
still the families have to sign up annually anyway, on no matter what program they're on.
I just can't remember the ins and outs of direct certification.
I don't think they're automatically enrolled annually.
Well, with the meals. they have
As a
to-
parent, I can tell you, they just go to school and they eat.
yeah,
That's where we're at right now,
Talking
yeah.
about for SNAP or
Yeah.
for fuel, you have to sign up
Oh, right.
annually.
Yes, it's for those for those programs.
Yeah, which then
Right.
gives you the automatic enrollment.
Right,
which
right.
then Whatever you
Right.
say certified.
The issue becomes if they've got to do another piece of paper for us.
Right.
And that has always turned out to be a pretty high hurdle, actually. Yeah,
Good
whereas direct
question.
certification.
I think we're almost done going around. Jamie, did you have one more question for us tonight? Counselor?
Thank you. I'm good right now. Thank you.
Are there any other questions that we need to ask of the school committee and the school superintendent and the mayor's office? We've been going at it for a good 2 hours, and this has been, I feel like we loosened up a little bit from your original presentation, which is really good because you've been persuasive to us, and then we in turn are very appreciative of the work that you're doing and the communities that you serve and the challenges that you are rising to under very, very challenging circumstances. And so Wordley said, all that we can do, all of us, we're here to help as we can. We hope that you continue your clear campaign with the administration in terms of serving those needs that you feel are appropriate to fund. Because as you've said several times, yours is a expense-driven or needs-driven budget, not a revenue budget.
I have no further questions for school committee administration. I have an internal city council question, not internal as in secretive.
We should mention when the public hearing is, Scott, if you don't mind, but Council Worthy.
That was going to be the question.
Oh, okay.
It's okay. Public hearing on that, and there was a question raised in the email of Graywood. We've done all of our, checked all our boxes. And whether the meeting can be, we take a vote today, we need to have another meeting on this.
I'm good with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there was some concern about not having received, as Tony has said, we're all still of the old school. We like to see budget books and put them under our pillows at night and try and absorb what it is that you've done.
You're welcome. So how many people would like a paper budget book? Raise your hand now.
Well, we're good. I think we're better.
Next year.
We're better now.
I know that the book changes, that's the thing, right? Because I'm paper driven too, but the book changes, so you have to get the updates, otherwise it's
Right.
useless.
Constantly
You know
changing.
that, it's
Yeah.
on every day, every time Gary runs a report, which is every day, it changes.
It's take out
That's
section,
it.
take out section 7.
With a little
replace it.
message.
Right.
Sherry, could you
Section
clarify for me
E.
when that budget,
Tuesday, June sixth at 6 o'clock via Zoom.
Tuesday, June 6th via Zoom is the public hearing on the total full city budget?
Correct.
So be there or be square by Zoom and in person. I know.
And you had.
No,
your-
No, that
Just
will
Zoom.
be via
By
Zoom.
Zoom.
It's a full city council, special city council meeting, so it's just via Zoom.
Thank you for that clarification.
And the school committee's already had their public hearing. So if people
Yes.
wanted to talk about the school budget, that was the place to do it.
So, just the negotiation session that night. So do you need some folks from the schools to be able to answer questions or? Happy to be just, I don't know, I can't remember the expectations from you.
The hearing is for us to hear from the public on the overall.
Okay.
So I can't imagine there be a specific question relative to the school department that the public will be asking through the council that you have.
You've had your public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you
And
voting
they
it
should
that
have
night?
No,
No, we vote the following week.
Right, so yeah.
That's the public hearing and then it's a week later.
I think we're okay.
If that's the case, it'd be my pleasure to go ahead and read the motion, the recommendation of the Budget and Finance Committee. And that would be to move to recommend that the city council, that the Budget and Finance Committee recommends the city council to approve the fiscal year 2024 school department budget in the amount of $49,378,838,897. And Kenny, I know you're listening somewhere out there, but assuming that that's right, John,
It is correct.
I so move.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? on anybody's part?
Yes, please.
Sure thing.
So
DNF.
just good luck between the school committee mayor's office and
Yeah,
keeping that
we
disparity.
understand what you're dealing with. and Appreciate the outreach that the school committee has made in terms of their advocacy and their sense of the need for that.
But if there's questions that are addressed to us regarding the school budget, should we be directing it towards the school department? I mean, is that the proper, I mean, if to get the correct answer rather than.
I can assure you I would not be able to answer the question
Yeah,
accurately well.
so that's all I
With
just
the
want
working
for
with the-
counselors, should they send it to the school committee or to the
We should
superintendent's
probably
office?
send it maybe through Val
Right.
over, right? So that,
Right now, it might be best if it just goes to Ben,
Yeah,
because I'm in a
she
different
could
role.
be here,
So,
Oh.
the governor.
yeah, maybe
Yeah, just.
So send it to
questions.
Joanne,
whoever,
Joanne to Stephanie.
whoever, just so there's a central point coming in.
So if there are
Send it
outstanding
to- I
council,
would say send it to Joanne.
if there are
and
outstanding council
Joanne
questions,
can-
they should be directed to the city clerk, Joanne
And
Sanos,
she can send it to Stephanie and.
as appropriate.
Yeah, they don't have to know.
CC one, Sharpie, not.
They don't even necessarily have to be budget questions.
Well, if they are budget questions, I mean, we'd love, the mayor's office would love to see them too, just so that if, since we will be at the public hearing, if we can help.
So
be
if I forward
helpful,
them,
Work with the.
Well, will you
school
guys be
committee.
getting every school committee email?
Hmm.
Will you be getting every school committee email? Or is it
Well,
just
the mayor
the
gets school committee emails. Right,
Well, you'll have
the
to talk
mayor
to the
is-
interim mayor.
the mayor is a member of the school committee.
So the motion has been made and seconded, seeing no further discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously and good luck.
Thank you.
For your support.
Motion to adjourn, BNF.
Oh, okay.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Motion to, go ahead.
Motion to adjourn
You do it.
committee as a whole.
Second.
Wait, second.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
We can.
Are you jumping ahead of yourself?
Double dip. Yeah,
I didn't second the.
Yes, you did. Okay, now Jamie needs to vote.
On the
Um, All those in favor?
Roll call.
Roll call, right? Jamie, you still on the
We
call?
feel really good about it. I was, yeah.
Actually,
No,
so
you are
the chair of the-
So, still there?
Well, now,
I'm still, wait, so roll call vote, everybody. Oh, no, Jamie's gone, so we're all set.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Into our budget right now.
There you go.
I'm not so worried
Wow.
about this year, but it's,
Woo.
I think it was a rise.
Yeah.